Okay, we're in the drawing again. Remember, it's a great idea to make sure that you've got some toolbars up. You do that by right-clicking on a toolbar and bringing up a set. As a rule, layers, modify, and draw are three you're going to want to have on. Dimension, you can bring on and off as you care. And you want to really get good very quickly in establishing that you've got layers and that they're all turned on. You can talk about later about on freeze and changing colors. It's that everything's going to tend to be done within here. In other words, you want to change the color of object, you change it here. You might want to change it to blue or yellow or red or gray or some other weird blue, and I'm going to do that. Let's see, for this example, and realize that that blue is not that blue. And that point of the potential of changing line weight, so you can see better perhaps if you're like me, that's all very possible. So we'll go ahead and draft that way now. But remember, we can then turn on line weight there and realize that now that layer we have in is object, so I can learn to erase. Click again. And I'm going to hit regen, R-E-G-E-N. Sometimes that will help to clear your screen. You notice I have polar on, so I can turn it off. And now, once again, learn to draft a box bigger than the thing you want to draft. As we get going pretty soon, you're going to learn that you might want to start not at 0, 0 for your box, because a logical space to put your things would be at your object would be 0, 0 at the center of mass, or 0, 0 at the bottom left, or 0, 0 at the center of rotation. So you can vet pretty good, and this may be the first time you do this, to click rectangle and then key in what you want. And rectangle is one of these things that you do not want to read what it's asking you. You just want to tell it, I want to do a rectangle, and my starting point is -2, -2, 0. Again, keep that third coordinate until you're convinced that you know it's 3D at a 0 elevation. And then by not looking, if you then say at, which means from that last point, and I'm going to say 20, 20, you'll succeed in drafting an exact box that's 20 by 20. Now, realistically, you're going to see when we do these boxes, the habit, because I did it with a rectangle command, is to immediately say X for explode and blow it up. Just to show you that you have some knowledge that things are going to be counterclockwise, if I type LI list for this, you can see that that one is going to be at a direction of 0, and this one, I hit a space bar and then I'm selecting, is at 180, etc. And this one is actually coming down at 270. So I have to realize that I still, when I draft these next lines, I might want to, in fact, not necessarily use those lines as my offsets. But we're going to do this one differently. We're going to essentially use the concept of, first I'm going to do it by the concept of relative coordinates, realizing that very often your relative coordinates aren't going to be a distance at an angle, but they're going to be a change in x and a change in y, and important here, a change in z for later. So I'm going to begin this so that the very, very bottom of problem 1-3, bottom left that lays on the ground, is my 0, 0 point. So I can then say line, and my first point would be 0, 0, 0. And I can now, as I move my mouse around, this is where, in fact, I tell you it is worthwhile to do the scripting thing. And it probably would be better just to script off in your own little file. But instead, you can just say at, and I want to go 4 at an angle of 0. Now, I could do it that way, or I could go 4, 0, which is a change of 4 in the x and 0 in the y. And then I can say at, I want to go 0.75, 1, and then at 0, 1, and then at, in this case, you're going 2.75 but in a negative x direction. So you could say minus 2.75, comma 0. And then at, in this case it looks like it's 0, so at 0, comma minus 1. At minus 2, comma 0. And this next one you might change it up a little bit. At 1.75 at an angle of 90 degrees. At 0.5 at an angle of 0. When I say angle, what I should be saying is direction. I'm going to move in with my mouse a little bit so you can see. At 1.25 at an angle of 90. At 1.5 at an angle of 0. This next one's going to be a little bit tougher, and you'd have to think about 1.95 and 1. So you really want to go, it looks like, down 0.95 at 0.95. And it's not a bad idea for readability, 0.95 at an angle of 270. At 2.75 at an angle of 0. At 0.95 at an angle of 90. At, change it up on yourself every now and then, minus 0.75, comma 1. At 2, 3.5, and 0.5. So at 4, or at minus 4, comma 0. At minus 1.25, comma minus 1. At 0, comma minus 3. And you want to get out of the habit of using that close, but in fact I will show you can then say close. Once again, learning that you can grab across everything to select, and then either going here to change the layer or changing the properties to put that on the correct layer, which we said we wanted to be object. And you see in this case we made the object to be blue, and we have something that's a contiguous shape. Forgetting, not forgetting, or not forgetting to do this, then change to the dimension layer. Remember that you can right-click on any toolbar to bring up a set of toolbars, bring up the dimension toolbar, not grabbing the first one but the second one, and learning to go shift right-click the endpoint of one thing, shift right-click the endpoint of one thing, shift right-click the endpoint of another in that direction, and then once again using the aligned, shift right-click perhaps the endpoint of that, shift right-click the endpoint of that, and you've come up with the basic bounding box. So that's 840. What I'm going to do now is the same thing right next to it by offset. Not even paying attention to where I am, but potentially by drafting on a layer. For now I'll use a hidden line layer to what I draft basically on, and just going through this process of offsets. Not even paying attention to where I put my first point, but taking, and for now, turning the polar snap on, drafting a line here with my polar, getting my hand off the mouse and saying maybe I'll go 10 in that direction, doing the same thing here, kind of arbitrary, taking my hand off the mouse and going maybe 10 in that direction, and realizing now to offset my bounding box, in other words, the total length of this thing, left and right, would be in fact 6 left and right, and it would appear to be 6 up and down. So offset, T for through, offset 6 this way and 6 that way. Notice how I've got a different visual clue here. And so right away, we might want to think about just doing these bounding boxes and figuring out the lines. Offset 1.25 from here to here, and offsetting 1 from there to there. So let's see how I did there. That was 1.25 and this is 1. I can now get in this concept of doing different layer work. So I can now go line from the shift right click the end point, shift right click the intersection of that to the shift right click the intersection of that. So I can maybe at that point even get rid of some of these lines, but if we know this was 1.25 that way and this is 1, you actually had a bit of a line of symmetry. So we could go ahead and offset 1 here. And once again, do line from the intersection to the intersection. Here, I don't need that baseline off on the right. I could do F for fillet. Click, click, spacebar, click, click. And then remember that we probably would want it right-click properties. However you're going to learn to change the properties is the common skill to Windows that you can go ahead and change the layer. And we'll see there are other ways in terms of targeting. Match prop would be one. Targeting that to the object layer. Closing that out. And so you're progressing again. Same thing going across here. Sometimes you want to keep those. That 1 is good. You want to go across now here. If this was what you had all the way, you can offset 0.75 from here going back. And once again, knowing the current layer is what the next line is going to be from the intersection to there to the intersection. And what you can realize very quickly is when you offset something, it stays on the same layer. When you draw it, it draws on your current layer. So here's something that you really don't want to do too often, but you can stumble along. You can draw a line on top of another line, but it's not a great idea until you master layers. So we've got there, we can offset this line 0.95, offset 0.95, and draft a line on top of another line. So there's lots of different ways to go about doing these things, but learning that shift right click, that offsetting is a large part of it is kind of important. So we're going to offset back now, offset 2.75. This thing comes back here. Now you might do fillet, F for fillet. Click, click. And finally now, if you think about this line going through, I'm going to introduce you to the concept to re-review the concept of break. Now break works well when you don't have your snaps on, and it's great for keeping two things around and for being exact. So I'm going to say BR or break looks like this, and I'm just going to click here and here. So I will have that around. So when I do F for fillet, click, click, right, and I've got this already here and there, I'm going to have retained that line down here. If you remember now, this 1 is still there, and in fact what we wanted is a 1.75, offset 1.75. We can do F for fillet, we can click, click, we can click, click. And what you're going to start to see now, it helps your brain to fill in the lines with the correct colors or the correct layers. Helps your brain. So a lot of this is about using visual clues. This one from here coming down was 1.25, offset 1.25. One thing you're doing by using offset is you're not leaving a lot of extra lines around. Fillet, click, click, space, click, click. You're now coming down 1.75, offset 1.75, down to here, fillet, click, click, spacebar, click, click, and you're now across. In effect, we broke this probably not as well as we could have, but if you think about now the gap being 1.05, O for offset 1.05, clicking this across there, F for fillet, click, click, spacebar, click, click, once again clicking and clicking and changing the layer so you can use your brain to fill in as you go. You're now left with an offset of 1.01, offset 1 takes you down to there, and then offset 0.75, which you had before, and the concept that you can now draft from the intersection of there to the intersection of there. Learn to use F for fillet. Click, click, spacebar, click, click, spacebar. In the end here, click, click. And finally, if this is about right, you notice that in effect one did something wrong here because you really wanted to go up to there so you can get this visual check. So as you go from here down, that should be through, that's 1, and this distance from here to here, so you probably have something screwed up. And if you look at some of it, it probably came down to my defining my bounding box as being 6 when it was supposed to be 5. And so for grins, I will show you left click, left click. So I've selected, and now I use my left click mouse button, space bar, move. I'm going to move that for the shift right click, the endpoint of there, and I can realize visually that looks a little bit more correct. F for fillet, click, click, space bar, click, click. And you start to see that your eye will then pick up a little bit easier. F for fillet, click, click. Take this one to be the right layer, which is object. And you're looking a little bit better here in terms of fillet, click, click. That one, you remember, you can't cut it or fillet it, you can erase it. Fillet, click, click. Change that to the correct layer. And you have something that's looking a little bit more correct. So you'll realize that the mistake I made by doing this in offset was not taking out my calculator and not visually checking that in reality this was not a square bounding box, but a bounding box that was 6 across by 5 up. So getting your bounding box right will help. I will finally now introduce you to one of the more important commands as we look at this, and that is to put lines together. It is one of the last of the add a loaf minus an RP, give me a break, make me a region. I'm going to do PE for Polyline Edit. It's the opposite of explode. It's a little bit weird, but you're going to select one line. Do you want to turn it into one? Yes. And then J for join, and then grab all your objects by a window. Do not use the multiple. And you notice when I'm grabbing here, I want to not grab lines that I do not want to connect up. What you'll see from that then is it gives me something that when I list, LI list it, it's listed as a whole thing, and it has some other data besides just the linearness to it. And it's one way to go about checking. I'm going to do the same thing over here with the first one. I'm going to say PE for Polyline Edit, select, yes, J for join. I'm going to grab individually this time. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 or 18. And I want you to remember that it will take its direction from the line of the first line that I grab. So as I do that, it did it. Now when I do an LI list on one, look at that number, 33.1016, and a list on the other, LI. I hit an I, not an LI. LI for a list on this one. Go back and forth on the video, you'll see that they are exactly the same shape. What's great about doing a polyline and what's bad about doing a polyline is that we can now grab, left click, and then left click, space bar, move, and now I can move it by having a shift right click to the end point of there, and you see they are in fact the same shape. I can then grab one, left click, space bar, I'm going to rotate this maybe 180. And you see that in fact it's no longer a Chicago Bears symbol, but something else entirely. Thanks for listening.